Hi, folks. Ryan Honeyman here from Lift Economy. Many folks have come to us over the last 10 years and asked, how do I get more involved in creating an economy that works for the benefit of all life? They also ask, what skills and experiences do I need to help make this transition? So 3 years ago, we created something called the Next Economy MBA to help address this and similar questions. Lift Economy's Next Economy MBA is an online course that's designed for entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, students, recent graduates, employees, and folks who want to learn more about transformational next economy strategies and businesses. Join the growing alumni network of nearly 250 alumni who've gone through this program and learned essential skills and hopefully built lifelong relationships for catalyzing businesses in the emergent and regenerative economy. So we encourage you to check out our course. You can go to lifteconomy.com/MBA. The next course, Cohort 7, starts on September 21st, 2021. So once again, go to www.lifteconomy.com/MBA. And now, on with the show. Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
So blessed and fortunate to have Jessica here. And Jessica, I'm wondering if maybe you could just introduce yourself and maybe the story of Three Stone Hearth in whatever way you feel is appropriate to acquaint any of the listeners or viewers later with what you're up to.
Sure. So we call our business model a community-supported kitchen. And the idea, we've been in business almost 10 years. And the idea at the beginning was really a sort of an experiment in scale. And our feeling was that we've got corporate food in this country, and then we have home-cooked food. But what we wanted to figure out is whether there's room for kind of community-scale food production and processing. So I know we've got a lot of artisanal producers, so people who are doing sort of a community scale of various things, bakers or charcutiers or things like that. But we wanted to create a place that was a single kitchen that was dedicated to transforming local and sustainable ingredients into prepared foods for lack of a better word, modern people. Mm-hmm. With the understanding that our modern context is very specific, and we live a specific kind of life in modern urban America, and we have specific kinds of needs, and those needs are part of what drives so many of us to purchase corporate produced food, most of which, almost all of which is deleterious to our health, to the environment, and to our economy, I believe. So we had a huge amount of money going to corporations through our food system, and almost all of it having a negative impact, but not really an alternative of where to direct our resources to support our lifestyles, which tend to be very busy. Most people work a job. Most households, both people work jobs. Our households are small. We tend to live in households of 1, 2, 3, 4 people. We're not living in households of 10 or 20. We're not organized in villages with communal ovens, though people in historic times and in other parts of the world certainly are and have been. But our lives are organized in a certain way, and we desperately need healthy, nourishing food. We have a huge range of health problems in this country that are directly related to nutrition, and nutrition can help with all of them without exception. So the need for healthy food is there, but we don't have the time to process things and procure things the way that we really need to support our own health and to support, as you put it so eloquently, all life. So we're already in need. We need certain amount of convenience foods, or the way I'd rather say it is that we need some support. We need some help. We need some foods that help nourish us. And even if we keep cooking from scratch on a daily basis, which actually in my household we mostly do, I still utilize a huge number of Three Stone Hearth products because they help me to do that. They actually support me to do that instead of ordering pizzas or getting burritos or whatever. Not that we never order pizzas or get burritos. It happens occasionally, but we don't have to do it very much.
Yeah.
And we don't have to buy very much corporate food at all.
So there's a number of things there that totally, I think, resonate. We have a culture in the affluent world that demands convenience because of some of the structural mandates of the exploitation economy that keeps people working very hard to meet their needs through income and reciprocity, through the kind of extractive economy with its income inequities. And because of this demand for convenience, we're largely beholden to the convenience food economy, which is also indicative of extracting from social connection and nature. And then something else strikes me. I wonder, one thing I love about your model as a kitchen, a place that is producing this nutrient-dense food, this nutrition for the community, but you also integrate education. Something that I personally experienced and just see around me is, as I came into my adulthood, I had almost zero skill in cookery, and very little knowledge about what's seasonal, local, and around me. And so Three Stone Hearth is not just a food provider. Maybe you could tell a little bit about some of the other things, other aspects of what is a community supported kitchen? What are some of the services? What does it actually provide?
So two things. One thing I'll say is that we don't actually do a huge amount of education around cooking. When we first started, our model was a volunteer model. And so we let people come and volunteer. And the hope was both that it would be participation, people would be participating, but also they would be learning. We ended up abandoning that for a multitude of reasons that I could go into if you are interested in them. But most of our education currently, the public education that we do, is more around the why of our diet and less around the how. So it's more sort of getting people to understand what our nutritional philosophy is and our nutritional basis, which is pretty transformative information in and of itself because it's all about the nutritional wisdom of traditional diets. And we tend to live in a culture that always thinks that the new thing is the good thing and that we're on this great path of progress and we've reached the pinnacle now of human development. And that information itself sort of calls all that into question. And it actually gives a pretty graphic example of what the change looked like to an extractive economy right as it was happening. So I think it pulls in a lot of things that you're talking about to do that education, and I think it's super valuable. And we certainly could do more cooking education, and it's on our radar. But the other thing that I want to emphasize is that I think for a lot of people, the foods that we provide enter into their own personal ecosystem of their households. Ecosystem's not the right word, but it's kind of the right word, in a particular way. And I think getting back to this sense of it supports people to cook because we will have done everything up to a point. And then, at the very least with our food, you have to heat it. Right. A few things that you heat out of the jar, but very, very few. For the most part, you take it out of the jar and you heat it up. So you're at least applying some kind of fire or heat to it. But we also make a lot of things that I would just consider components, which really do require cooking.
Mm-hmm.
So meat patties, every week we make a meat patty. It's raw and it's packaged, but you have to, take it out of the package and you have to cook it. You have to have a pan and you have to cook it. But, 75% of the work is done. You don't have to mix it. You don't have to season it. You don't have to, buy all the ingredients. It's ready to cook. Our broth, some people just heat our broth. Most people add at least some salt and lemon or something to it. But, the way that I use our broth is much more culinary. Last night I made a risotto with our broth. I make risottos, or I make a gravy, or I make a soup or something. So I think the other way that we support what you're talking about too is providing, and I'm just remembering too that we make things like falafel dough, a cornbread batter, things like that are, the cornbread batter is nixtamalized. So it's incorporating this whole traditional processing that's nutritional into it. So it's not like anything else you could get off the shelf.
Right.
But it's sort of intended to take people a step further into the kitchen than they have been. And I think the food in different ways cooks, and they just expect us to cook for them, and we sort of do. They heat it up and they eat it. But other people really do use the food and learn from the food through cooking it. Right. And that's a way in which we are also educating just through the service that we're providing. So I don't know if that sort of clarifies that at all.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think it's just this kind of stacked set of value that a community-supported kitchen creates in the relationship of a community to the source of its nutrition, to its food. It's supporting not only through the actual good or the nutrient-dense product, but like you mentioned earlier, the knowledge of selecting in the supply chain of the local farmers what's seasonal, what's fresh, and what has nutrition. I'm wondering if maybe you could say a little bit, I share some details sometimes when talking to people about Three Stone Hearth, of your intentional selection of who you're taking food from. I'm wondering if maybe you could comment a little bit about who supplies the raw production that goes into the kitchen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our ideal really is to be taking the local, ecological, sustainable produce of our area, local, and transforming it into these prepared or almost prepared or semi-prepared products. And now the extent to which we're able to live up to our ideals is, of course, part of what being in business is all about. But almost all of the produce that we use, and I just say almost because there's a tiny fraction that isn't, but almost all of the produce that we use is certified organic. The fruits and vegetables and the beans and grains. And we'll often, one thing that you realize when you start is the vast majority of bulk beans, for example, are coming from overseas. They might be certified organic, but a lot of them, you get black beans. I remember opening my first bag of black beans. And when you go to the bulk bin at your health food store, you don't necessarily know where those beans are coming from. Right. They're bulk organic beans at some price and you buy them. But when you see them come in the bag, they'll say, grown in China. And you're like, black beans from China? There's not even a tradition of black beans in China. Black soybeans, but not black beans. So we really went out of our way to find a Northern California source for black beans, and we're really lucky to have them. And the only reason we're able to get them on a regular basis is because we've got a connection with a guy that lives in the area and he's willing to go to the farm, pick up the black beans for us, drive them down. I think we pay him a delivery fee, and obviously we pay the farmer, but he's just invested in what we're doing. And when he comes down, he always buys a lot of food and takes it up, and he's a green builder and he's very ecologically conscious. So we've been over the years building these kinds of relationships to source things as well as we possibly can. When it comes to our produce, we buy a huge amount through Veritable Vegetable, which is a local distributor of organic produce. But we've, at the same time, been cultivating relationships with other farms and distributors. There's a smaller distributor up in Sonoma called Feed Sonoma. We've been working with Feed a lot, and it's great because he's aggregating stuff and sending us lists so we're able to buy, and he's bringing it down, which is kind of a deal breaker for us. If we can't go and forage for all this food, we need it brought to us, we need it delivered to us. Mm-hmm. We work directly with River Dog Farm and have for years. And at River Dog, we both buy a lot of vegetables, but we also buy chicken from them, a huge mm-hmm. amount of chicken from them. And that chicken is pastured. That chicken is also fed organic grains. So not all of our meats are organic. With meats, we've tended to privilege pastured over organic. And so, some of the chicken that we get is pastured, but isn't fed organic grain. Same for the pork. Almost all of our beef is grass-fed, grass-finished. That kind of wobbled a little bit during the drought because we couldn't get, farmers just simply couldn't finish on grass when there wasn't any grass. And so we supplemented with some grain. And so part of what we're trying to do is to build this local food system, to develop and grow this local food system holistically. And
right.
So we're specifically not obsessed with certification of everything. We're really open to varying different ways to work with producers and to support them to make different decisions. For example, one of the producers that we buy chickens from, Marin Sun Farms, they don't feed organic grain, and we did a pilot with them where we promised to pay them a certain rate if they raised a whole flock of chickens on organic grain as sort of an experiment to see what their costing looked like, what worked for them. And so part of what we try to do, we don't just say, we'll only take it if da-da-da, but this is where we want to go, this is where we want to develop, and is there a way we can invest in that development?
So investing in developing the supply chain for the benefit of the whole food shed becomes more locally self-reliant, more resilient, and more nutritious through the efforts of the community-supported kitchen to be very intentional in your relationships. Exactly.
You are very eloquent in describing that, but yeah, and that's hard for some of our customers. They want us to have a bar, and everybody reaches this bar, mm-hmm. and to us, this isn't a linear process, and there are no bars. Yeah. This is a spiraling process. And when we first started buying chicken, we couldn't even get pastured chicken, but right. We were still doing what we were doing, and then pastured chicken came on the market. Then we started to shift to pastured chicken. And right. Now organic chicken's starting to come on the market, so we're trying to get it all organic as well. And then at some point, the new thing, it's already starting, is, soy-free. And maybe at some point we'll be able to access, wholesale.
Carbon sequestering, wholesale, pastured, soy-free, organic, the best practices for the benefit of all. But being a large customer that's supporting some of the farmers who are engaging with these practices by directly building relationships with them, or through close-in relationships through ethical hubs and distributors like Feed Sonoma and Veritable, by being a large buyer and a committed buyer with the brand community that you've built around the kitchen itself becomes an anchor to the whole food shed to sustain it. Another thing that strikes me as something that I'm inspired by with what you and your team and what the co-op has done at Three Stone Hearth that really grabs me and has me thinking of the model is, so you're playing this really important role in a food shed, connecting a community of people, a place-based community, to the source of their nutrition, supporting them in their health for not only their benefit, but the benefit of the entire environment within which they live. And Okay, so any business theoretically could take that as a value that they're providing. We're seeing kind of an explosion of a plethora of venture financed um, initiatives that are trying to meet some of the demand that we talked about earlier for convenience, but do it better than some of the truly exploitation oriented economic enterprises that exist today. What I love about Three Stone Hearth is the values that drive the decision making for what you're providing to the community and your mission translate holistically throughout the entire organization in its practices, how you organize it, how you're structured, and really how you operate the business, even how you finance the business. So I'd love to talk about a few of those things and kind of hear from you. For example, let's talk about how the community actually supports the kitchen or supported the kitchen in its engendering kind of stages. Before direct public offerings were kind of popularized more recently or becoming more popular now, which is a great thing, local investing. Three Stone Hearth was kind of at the cutting edge or the bleeding edge before that. So I'm wondering, could you share a little bit about the story of how the community came together to, or how your co-op engaged the community to make the financing happen?
Sure. So yeah, when we explored briefly the idea of venture capital in the beginning. We had one meeting with one venture capitalist, and we all came away feeling yucky. I mean, I don't necessarily know enough about venture capital to have any kind of judgments about it, but it felt like it wasn't the right fit for us. And none of us had any money above the $4,000 that each of us put in to pay the first and last month's rent on our first kitchen. But that was our capital investment to each of us. None of us had any more to put in, really. One of us had a little bit, which he ended up loaning to the company just as members of the community did. So basically what we did was we had a nice mailing list. So we had a nice list of people in the community that shared our values, or at least had significant overlap with our values, and were interested in seeing this business exist. And not knowing that it wasn't in compliance with federal security regulations, we just asked them if they would lend us money and to start, and offered terms, which, with just it was basically, you loan us anywhere from 5 to 15. There might have been one or two $20,000 loans in there, but they were small loans, 5, 10, 15, $20,000. And loans, personally, there were 5 of us that co-founded the business, and we each took out just $100,000 worth of loans, and we each signed for 20. And we basically just signed a letter saying, I promise to pay you back if the business goes under, me personally. And most of us didn't really have much collateral to base it on. But we did. And, people in the community said, one of them who loaned us money and I signed on hers. I think we gave them some option we kind of matched people. So if there was some relationship or somebody knew somebody, that would help. But one woman in the community who loaned us money and I signed on it, she said, if you guys go under, I'm just going to have you cook for me until it gets paid. So that was her justification. And 6 months grace period, and then started paying back. The majority of those loans were paid back in cash on a monthly basis, but a few of them we paid back in food too, which worked great for us, of course. And one of the people who got paid back in food is a math teacher, and she knew enough to negotiate for a higher rate of return, since she was getting paid back in food instead of in cash, and she got that. And so for those people, instead of sending them a check, we just put an amount of money on their Three Stone Hearth account every month. That paid them back. And all of those loans were paid back on time in 5 years. They were all 5-year loans. And at just about 6 months into the business, I think, I'd have to check with Misa, we realized that we needed to totally restart our ordering system. We needed to start over with it. And the only way we could do that was to hire a programmer. As you know, programmers aren't cheap. And so we were going to need about $50,000 more. So we took out a second round of loans for $50,000, and similar terms, 6-month grace period, and then 5-year loan term. And the interest rate at that point was a little different because the economic downturn had already started. So different interest rate, and those loans are also all paid off.
Wonderful. Great.
Mm-hmm.
So directly engaging the community with kind of reciprocity models that are not entirely cash-based. So some barter and exchange, which are kind of leading indicators of possible practices for the next economy. Can you tell me about something that, of course, Lyft Economy is really excited about? Is we love working with worker-owned cooperatives. Maybe just if you want to share a little bit about kind of where you're at as a worker-owned cooperative, or anything that comes to your mind in the context of Three Stone Hearth as a worker-owned cooperative. I think people will be inspired by knowing how many worker owners there are, and then maybe just the total number of employees and who's on path, but whatever you want to share.
Sure, yeah. So the 5 of us who co-founded were the original worker owners, and we actually didn't, when we started, to be honest, I don't think we knew really what a worker cooperative was. Like, I don't think we really got it. I think we were attracted by the idea that the 5 of us all felt like that we were equal. And we thought, I think we liked the idea of a cooperative, and that the cooperative could grow and other people could be owners. But I don't think we really understood what it all meant. Now that I know more about what a worker cooperative really is, I understand on a much deeper level how radical and transformative and important it is, by the simple fact that it subordinates capital to labor instead of subordinating labor to capital. Makes a huge difference. So we didn't really initially form a path, create any kind of path of how people could own. And so the 5 of us were the only worker owners. For a while, Larry, who was one of our co-founders, got ill and had to leave the business, and eventually passed to the spirit world. And then we were just 4, and for many years we were just 4. And then we initiated eligibility for other people to become worker owners, but we set the bar pretty high, and we only got 1 person. And then we realized we needed to rethink it, and we needed to lower the bar on buy-in amount, how long somebody had been with the company, how long they were willing to commit to the company, and we lowered those all dramatically. But then we raised the bar on the process. And this is really where the kind of deliberately developmental piece of our organization comes in, which was that we realized that the most important thing for us with any new worker owner is that they be working on themselves, and also that they have an alignment with our values, and an interest and a certain basic knowledge in a couple of areas. And so we developed a candidacy process, which is now it goes pretty deep, and it's a 5 to 6 month process. And so it's right when we started that, we actually had 2 more worker owners who met the initial criteria. We just lowered the bar on buy-in amount, and they joined. So then we had 7, and then we initiated candidacy, and we got 7. Well, we got 8 more, and then Catherine, who was one of the co-founders, resigned. So that was the first person to leave the co-op since Larry had. So then we had 14, and then last year 6 made it through candidacy. So now we have 20. So last year it was pretty close to 50% of hours worked in the business were worked by worker owners. So we actually have a few more employees than we have worker owners. We're at about 45 staff right now, but a lot of the employees are very part-time. And so in terms of the hours being worked in the business, even last year, it was pretty evenly split between employees and worker owners. And this year, now that we've got 20, that was with 14. Now that we've got 20, it's going to be, definitely the majority of the hours worked in the business are worker owners. So that's been really an area of big emphasis for me working with that program. I co-led candidacy last year with one of the other worker owners, and it's really pretty amazing to see that in action, to see people aligning, exploring what do I want to do with my life and thinking about it vis-a-vis their job and making a case for, I want to be a worker owner because I feel all this connection. And also, we asked people to come up with a purpose project, some kind of project that sort of expressed the overlap between their personal purpose and the company purpose. And just it's so interesting to see what comes up for people. And, again, you talk so much about the whole, to me, what's really moving is to see people bring more of themselves, be more whole in a workplace. Because I think by and large in workplaces, we tend to leave a lot of ourselves behind, and we only bring a very small part of ourselves to our workplaces, and we hold a lot back. And I've seen what it looks like when people sort of really face that head on and are willing to bring more of themselves and show up more fully. And it's super deep. It's super intense. It's intense for all of us. It's real. So that's what we're doing.
Which I think is so courageous, right? I think so much of business culture is afraid to acknowledge and then deal with some of the realities that people in the average adult in the affluent world will spend 80,000 hours in this vocational kind of setting. And if it's not a place for personal development, not only is that potentially a missed opportunity, but maybe something that's contributing to some of the deep crises in the world, the social and ecological crises. But then to have the courage to take that on deliberately, development, making the organization a place for personal development. What I think business people know, and you've experienced, is that's probably going to show in the bottom line. It's going to hurt potential earnings and potential for returns to investors and so forth. So deliberately structuring yourself so that you have the freedom and liberty to invest in people that way, not only investing in the supply chain and the practices, but investing in the people, is tragically decidedly rare, but deeply inspiring. So I'm just grateful for the amazing line you're holding there in some of the bringing purpose and the whole person to the company. I'm curious if you want to share anything more about what some of those practices might entail, and maybe if you could also add on to that, it's not just that Three Stone Hearth is acting as a place to hold people where they can develop themselves in terms of their emotional intelligence, their ability to communicate and make collective decisions or dialogue, deliberation, and all those pieces that what it means to work with others, which, by the way, I just want to add for the listeners to this interview series, was something that Lift Economy learned from Jessica Prentice and Three Stone Hearth. We used to tell all our co-op clients and others that, you need to be very careful and have a really fine filter for selecting people into the co-op as employees or worker owners. And it's all about recruiting and selecting only those people who are already predisposed and trained on some type of collective process. And that's so few people. I remember the day, Jessica, when you said to me, that would be a zero-sum game. And you're so right. We have to figure out a way to make co-ops, make our enterprises places for development. And the leadership in doing that, I think, is really courageous and important. But if you want to add any practices that you're doing there, and then the other piece that I'm just curious about is, and I share with people, if you want to say anything about how Three Stone Hearth has gone through not just being a worker-owned cooperative, but how you've then structured the cooperative with a framework that's, I think, an adaptation of holacracy, Maybe if you could share just a little bit about that, whatever you think is salient. I know I'm inspired by the work you've done there. But whatever you want to share, I think would be helpful.
Okay, yeah. So first, the development piece. So there is an organization and a body of work out there that is really promoting this idea of deliberately developmental organizations. And it was from them that I got this idea of that's a zero-sum game, that we need to be, as organizations, developing capacity. This is one of the best places that we have to develop capacity. And yeah, it's not easy and it's not efficient. There are certainly moments when the idea of just recruiting people that are only, already have these capacities is appealing. But on the other hand, I've seen amazing development happen. And that is one of the biggest joys of my job, to watch that happen, including in myself. I see it happening in myself. I see it happening in my coworkers all the time. To be in a community of people who are reflecting on themselves and what they bring to the table and what they do is huge. And to watch people who actually, for whom that way of being is quite foreign, to open up to it even just a little bit is amazing. To watch somebody in conflict resolution say to somebody else, don't take it personally that I don't trust you. I don't trust anybody. And I'm really working on that, is like,
it's real.
That's real. This is, in a sense, all organizations are developmental, because when we work in organizations, we have this incredible opportunity to learn and to develop. So I think the key word there is deliberately developmental, is that we're actually acknowledging that and working with it. And so that work has been very informed by Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy, who wrote Immunity to Change. And that tends to be the primary process that we use to do that capacity building, or what we call vertical development work within the organization. And everything that we do, and then I'll segue into holacracy too, but there's a whole structure out there to support organizations to become deliberately developmental, but it all costs money.
Right.
Plus there's a whole structure out there to support companies to become holacracies, but it all costs money. And so all of these things we're basically bootstrapping. We're doing it ourselves because we don't have the resources to invest in it. And I think that has its pros and cons. There's a depth that happens when you've really had to do it yourself and claim it for yourself and do it as cheaply as we've had to do it. That itself can build some capacity, to not rely on outside coaches and consultants because you don't have the budget for them. But it also, it has its disadvantages, and there's some hard learning of lessons going along. So we sort of stumbled upon holacracy a few years ago, and through Janelle Orsi of Sustainable Economies Law Center, and who happens to also be our lawyer. And we're very intrigued by its emphasis on transparency. And I think part of the issue is that for the five of us that co-founded the business, we didn't have a whole lot of organizational experience in terms of, community organizing or working in cooperatives. We had some, but none of us was really focused on governance or organizational development. So we didn't really have a language for that. I didn't even really know what governance meant. And we didn't have, a great streamlined way to hold meetings or to break down the work. We had a lot of operational strength and operational leadership, but we didn't have as much conceptual or structural leadership skills amongst the five of us. And so we were always in a kind of sense and respond mode, always, because we didn't know anything else. And we definitely didn't have much of a hierarchical corporate training. None of us had MBAs, so we didn't really have that coming into it. So we were really sort of naive, and again, had its pluses and its minuses, but we were very much in sense and respond. Oh, this doesn't seem to be working. Let's try this. Oh, that doesn't feel right. Let's do this. That's just how we operated. And the weakest area was how to look at the numbers, because it's hard to sense and respond to numbers you don't understand. So we needed help in just analyzing our numbers at the beginning, and now we have a much better grasp of our numbers. But initially, it was that transparency, clarity, setting boundaries, being work focused. I mean, part of the deal for us is that it was essentially 4 women who ran this business for many years, and we were very, very close and friendly with each other, but it made it very hard to distinguish what's work and what's personal.
Right.
And, women sort of, famously or infamously don't have quite the strong boundaries that men have. And so there was just a lot of muddiness, which of course we all know has its good sides, there was a lot of fluidity and there was a huge amount of love, but it also get really frustrating to not know, who was supposed to be doing something, but also not, to be too conflict averse to say, hey, are you doing that or am I doing that?
Right.
And, so holacracy is, it's kind of a hard system. It's not really a soft system. It's kind of hard, but we were also soft, that we kind of needed that hardness. Mm-hmm. We needed that structure, and it was the right kind of hardness for us because it was all about adaptation, and it was based on sense and respond, which we already were doing very well. Mm-hmm. The tough part for us has been how incredibly, cerebral and analytical it is, because a lot of us don't work that way. And it took us a while to realize that even though I think it's an amazing tool, that's all it is. It's a tool. Yeah. And it's only a tool. And it's not the answer to all your problems, which it seemed like at first. And I can say without any doubt, it's not. But it's an amazing tool to make progress on these problems. Yeah. And it opens up the space for a lot of other things. And then, we layered on top of that our experience creating reinventing organizations, which introduces not only the sort of the self-management, self-organizing principles, the sense and respond, the stuff that we already introduced to through holacracy, but also emphasizes the wholeness piece, which is really missing from holacracy in a lot of ways. It's kind of holistic in a sense, the way it's organized, but it's not particularly interested in the human experience.
Right.
And it doesn't pretend to be, and it doesn't have to be. But
right.
It's really important to understand it's just a tool, and that we needed to, it immediately brought up, we have to do this personal development piece, because holacracy just puts your patterns right in front of you. And if you don't have a way to work with them, it's just super frustrating. So so that's kind of how that evolved. So I wouldn't really say we're using an adaptation of holacracy. We're using holacracy. We pretty much follow the Constitution, but it's only one of the tools in our toolbox, and it doesn't. When you see a nail, you want a hammer, but when you see a screw, you want something else. I'm not sure a screwdriver goes very well, but yeah,
that works. So. With holacracy, you got some of the benefits of some of the hardness of having defining roles and the circles, and the ability to have the right kind of links and the right kind of meeting structures to be able to express tensions. However, that immediately brought up this self-evident need to actually have personal development be core to having functional kind of communication, and then the enable some of the benefits of autonomy and accountability that a structure like that has as a possibility, but not necessarily a de facto outcome. So the self-management stuff gets layered through all of that, and you've invested in all those things. can I ask you for an example that would benefit people listening? Just a short one, maybe something like when you described to me how the team handled a question about compensation. You don't have to tell me the details, but just how that was handled, what that meant, and or to the extent that you want to share about that might be helpful.
Yeah, so compensation, of course, is one of the toughest things that any organization is going to grapple with. And everybody who's working in a holacratic environment is struggling with compensation because holacracy doesn't tell you how to do compensation. And I think that's one of those places where you want the outside to tell you what to do because it's just too difficult and challenging to talk about it internally because everybody you're talking to has a very clear vested interest in the outcome. So it's tough. It's really tough. So and I also think that I'm very disappointed in the way that many cooperatives have dealt with this question, which is simply we'll just pay everybody the same amount. Because I feel like that really holds cooperatives back in terms of the impact that they could have on the society. And I think it's about a discomfort with being able to say, actually, different people bring different value to a company. And corporations say that, but of course they say it in such a skewed, exploitative way that doesn't feel good. And so the sort of the pendulum swings, and then, okay, everybody's the same, we're going to pay everybody the same. But that's not true. People do have different capacities, and they do have different values that they bring to an organization. And it's much more honest to admit that and to try to somehow work with it. And so that's what we've been trying to negotiate, is that, how do you acknowledge that, celebrate that, develop that, incentivize development, because as you develop, then you're going to be able to bring more value to the company and potentially earn a greater wage with that kind of egalitarianism that everybody is valuable and everybody matters. And of course, as a human being, this is not about us as a human being. This is about value we bring to a company. So that's really hard for people to tease out too. It's not that one human being is more valuable than another, but somebody brings more value to the company than somebody else. That's real. So one thing that we tried, which I think most people consider a very failed experiment and a terrible thing, but I consider a success in its own way, was we had a compensation panel where anybody in the company could volunteer to join, and that panel met. They were supposed to only meet for one day. They ended up meeting for 3 full days, and they spent time evaluating the finances of the company and deciding on how much they wanted to allocate based on projected income to labor. So then we had a sum, and then from that they figured out how much we could afford to increase wages, and the answer was not very much. And then they were in charge of doling that small amount out. And I think the thing that was really most unfortunate about it was that part of that process was that everybody in the company, first of all, it was complete transparency. So we shared everybody's wages with everybody, which I actually think was a big step forward. But then the second part was that, and I'll just clarify, shared wages with everybody within the company, not outside of the company. In the company. But then the second part was that we also invited everybody to submit sort of a bid for what they thought they should make. And I think that was, if anything, really the misstep, because the bids and the expectations got raised, and the bids were so outside of what the company was capable of affording that, there are some people that experienced significant disappointment coming out of that process. And there was also, for the panel, just the huge disappointment of, we can't basically do any of this. All the panel was really ultimately able to afford to do was to raise new hires up to what they had been led to believe they would get after 3 months. And that basically used up all of the money that they had. So it was a very disappointing process for everybody in that sense. So we did that once, and then at that point, because things were so tight, we basically put a wage freeze on and said, we'll revisit this in 6 months. And then what we did 6 months later was we saw that, so in our cost structure, we had put labor at 43.5%. And that's what the panel had set. And at that point in, I think it was August, we were running at about 42.5%. And so we figured we had 1 point that we could distribute in wages. And what we did at that point was converted that into a dollar amount and then converted that into an hourly amount. And then we let all the worker owners divide up that amount amongst all the staff. And then we just averaged all those numbers together and came up with increases for everybody that totaled the amount that we felt like we could spend. And that was a much better approach. I don't know that we could have gotten to that without having done the wage panel, because the wage panel brought the transparency and the cost structure to bear. I mean, it was the foundation upon which we did that second thing. But that thing still leaves significant, there's still problems. So that didn't solve everything, but it was a much healthier and better way. It was the right thing to do at that time. And we could do that again too, but I still have the frustration that I don't feel like that value is coming to bear enough on how people are making their decisions. And partly, we didn't give anybody any guidance about how to make their decisions. Everybody made their decisions based on their own values. So those all got averaged together. So if we were going to do that again, I would like there to be more work done around, getting people into the frame of mind. When you're doing that, you're actually sort of acting as a boss.
Yeah.
and acting as a boss towards these people, and not as a friend and not as a coworker, but you're in boss mode, which is kind of a hat that I'm able to put on. And I think that's capacity building too, for people to be able to put on that hat and really think about what's best for the company, who's really bringing the most value. But it's complicated. It's tough. So that's where we're at with that.
I really appreciate your candor and sharing, and really reaffirming for some of Lift Economy's experience in working with companies. We often find that there's a period of training and literacy that's critical for somebody to put on the boss or the owner hat. There's a curve there that's part of the development, I think, of the individual in a co-op or in an enterprise at all, as part of open book management, is this literacy curve. And we see it time and time again, where compensation intentions to be more transparent and then have a process for equitable development of full compensation across the company just take time. So actually you sharing your story is really, really valuable and affirming. And I'm seeing, Jessica, that I'm taking up more time than I had asked of you. So I want to just acknowledge that and apologize. But I want to ask a couple quick questions and share one thing. I want to share one thing another thing Lift Economy is really inspired by Three Stone Hearth, is part of your vision and mission is in connecting communities to their food and their source of nourishment. Being the hearth of a community is this idea of having the community supported kitchen become a model that literally could be a blueprint for communities everywhere, so that every community could have a community supported kitchen, especially where it's needed or missing. I think of the affluent world where it's mostly missing. And we're just super excited that part of what Three Stone Hearth sees as growth is growth through kind of a biomimetic regional replication and adaptation of your model, and just super inspired by that and grateful for the whole co-op holding that line. The question I have for you, and anything else you want to share, but the question I'd like to leave the interview with is, what can we do as a community, business community, interested customers, people interested in you and your work at Three Stone Hearth? What can we do to help? Is there anything that we can do in any way just to be supportive of your great work, and then anything else you'd like to share.
Wash your jars. No, that's huge. That's the piece that is sort of the work element that our customers have. We pack in returnable mason jars, and I've been thinking a lot about how to get our customers how to educate them and encourage them to be better stewards of their jars, because this whole thing depends on jars. They get reused, and of course jars can chip, and jars can, all kinds of things can happen to jars, and we really need everybody's help on that. So on the very mundane level, that's on my mind and is a big one. I'm just a huge believer in the reuse of glass, and I want that to work, and I want that to, I want it to work on every level. So I'm invested in that. I think another thing is to appreciate and understand what you said at the beginning, that we're working on all levels all the time in a holistic way. And sometimes I feel frustrated with customers who, get on a particular bandwagon and are asking for perfection in some particular area. And we're really doing difficult, deep, ongoing work here every day. And for people to just understand how complex it is, how many competing needs we're trying to balance, and how we're trying to keep the spirit of it right, to all those intangibles. If people just understood that, then I feel like they would be a lot more understanding and forgiving. And when I get emails from customers that are coming from that place, it's so nice. They might have a complaint about something, but it's couched in, I'm just so appreciate the work that you do and the service that you're providing, and it's made a huge difference to my family. And, that chicken was too bristly or whatever, So to have that context, for more people to have that understanding, to understand, partly this is just the work of educating people about, what I would call like the dysfunction, or, what's called the exploitation, just, how the extent to which the economic system that we're operating in does not support or reinforce our values, and that we're every day having to maintain and carve out this alternative, and that for all of us, it's not anything more than, an engagement with our own consciousness about things, and having to unlearn the behaviors of our society and relearn new ones. And it's huge. And there is no perfection, and there is no right way to do it. That we're trying to balance all of these yearnings all the time in all of our decisions. And that would be my main request for my community, is to just appreciate that and to understand that, and to be gentle, gentle with criticism, but also to be encouraging and appreciative of what that work looks like, and just kind of get it, that it's it's huge and it's important and it's a lot of levels, and there it is.
Thank you again for your candor, Jessica. I want you to know that at least by Lyft Economy on our team, you're seen, and all of you are seen for the incredible lines that you're holding, the stand that you're making for the transformation of an economy. I know some of my permaculture students have been employed at the co-op, and I've seen them go out in the world after leaving the co-op and making a huge difference in the lives of others. So all the wholeness that you're holding, the space that you're holding, it pays off in so many ways. And so there's at least a few of us out there who are seeing it. And I think a lot. I think your customers, based on the success, for the listeners to this interview or the viewers, just I want to comment that Three Stone Hearth is a fabulously successful business. It's a going concern. It invests a lot of any surplus generated from what could be a low margin business into development personally and in development of the supply chain through the stories that Jessica told us today. But it's a totally thriving, successful business with an incredibly strong customer base.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.